Hi, welcome to our conversations. I'm Tammy. This is Tracy. This is Molly and Nolan, and Tabitha's joined us for today. Hey, Molly, how about a recap of Dr. Lori's session?
Yes, definitely. So in the last video, you watched Dr. Lori talk about connection, and specifically connection with self. And what we learned is that growing up, there's a lot of people who had influence over our behaviors. We learned some things that weren't the healthiest, but now sitting as adults are people that are ready to take charge of our lives and address the unhealthy or even toxic traits and behaviors that we learned growing up, that now is the time to heal it. So we have to do that. We have to take a good hard look at ourselves and the things that we learned that weren't always in line with Scripture. What is Galatians say, the fruit of the Spirit that come out of us, or when our thoughts aren't lined up with what Philippians 4:8 tells us to think about, then it is our job and our responsibility to acknowledge those things and choose to lead ourselves into health and wholeness with Jesus. Does that kind of give a good recap?
It's a great recap, and it also draws on the fact that she talks about that we have to be the hero of our own story.
Yes.
You know, even though really hard things can happen to us and it's not our fault, or there's some things that we do that maybe is our own fault, but either way, we still can choose to be the hero of our own story and take those hurts and pains and bad choices and do something with them in our mind and in our connection with the Lord.
Yeah, I think sometimes we'll try to excuse our behaviors. You know, like we see something that we do or we behave a certain way, and we'll even say the things like, oh, that's just the way I am. Or, oh, this is just the way that I was taught. Or, oh, this is the natural way that my brain goes. But in the kingdom of heaven, that doesn't cut it. Like, that's not what we're actually supposed to function or live under.
Yeah. Or even you grew up thinking that that was the way to live.
Yeah.
And then you have no idea that that is not either socially appropriate, or you seem real anxious, or you are rude in ways.
Yeah, it's all about unlearning. So then you get to unlearn the old and put on the new.
Because on the flip side, it may also be something that you've gotten affirmation for, a way that you have acted that allowed people loved that you accomplished this or would take charge of that. And you seem to be somewhat if somebody's busy, if you want to get something done, ask the person who's busy. And so you have to relearn that that's not what Jesus is asking me to do. How do I stay in my lane and not fall back into that pattern?
Yeah, that's good.
And when we say yes to things and no to things, they're actually considering what Dr. Basie was calling those guardrails. So I might be busy, but am I busy doing the thing that keeps me within the guardrail, the Galatians 5 and Philippians 4:8. That's where we need to stay. And the things that I'm taking on or how I'm responding, do those things exhibit the Scripture?
I like whenever Dr. Lori talks about actor, doer, blamer, stuffer,
body person.
And I know it was super eye-opening to me is to picture the people who had the most influence over my life. So in that point it was my parents or just family that was around me. And so then you see kind of how they reacted under stress, and then seeing that I do the exact same thing. That's rough, but so necessary, probably.
Did any of you identify with one of those 5? Is anybody a doer, blamer, stuffer, body person?
I'm definitely a stuffer. If and it comes back to, I don't know how to manage those feelings. And so I'm just going to stuff them. Everything's going to be perfectly okay. And we'll just move on because that's what we need to do.
Where'd you learn that from?
My family. Like she said, the influential people that growing up were your examples to learn how to live from. And I was like, but then there's also the hard part of, well, I never want to do that. So I'm going to make sure that I never do that. But then because I just end up doing that exact same behavior.
Start becoming the thing you didn't want to become in the first place.
Yes.
Well, and the first part of that, as Dr. Lori talked about, was self-awareness. And it's the part, is it worse to be a big, hot, dysfunctional mess or a big, hot, dysfunctional mess in denial? And so it is so important to maybe find safe people who will tell you some attributes, how they would describe you. And even if they sound positive, maybe look at, like if they were to say, you're so accomplished, or what is behind that? Why am I so accomplished? And in what areas? And is that really what God is calling me to do? And sort of just getting in touch with yourself at the same time as you're connecting with God, going back and forth.
It looks at the root behind the behavior.
Right.
So someone could say, hey, you're super hardworking.
Right.
And you're a doer, like you get things done. But if the why behind it isn't in line with scripture or with the fruit of the Spirit, then something's off.
Yeah.
And maybe it's what's inside, because we can have it all together on the outside and everybody thinks that we're doing all of these great things, but inside we're screaming and we're nervous and we're really functioning on a high level of anxiety.
And then you may also be exploding on the people that you love the most, and they're seeing it come out because you're overachieving on the outside to the people that are asking of you. And it's a performance sort of nightmare rat race. So,
and I have a perfect example. So growing up, I was influenced by my family members and how I would act as a stuffer and all that. And so then I started thinking, I lived in the same house for all of my life until I moved out of my parents' house. They still lived there. And so you would have neighbors come and go. And I started believing that I would make friends and then that friend would move away. And so I started believing that it was because of me. So my performance was making them leave or making them move, when really it wasn't. And I was just a kid. And so that was something that I started to develop of, if I'm just good enough, if I act a certain way, or if I'm just quiet and I mind my P's and Q's and I do what I need to do, then life is going to be easy and everyone's going to like me. And so it became into a performance-based acceptance of where if I perform to the T of what someone wants, then I'm going to be accepted and I'm going to be liked. And then that goes into anxiety of a constant reel of, I have to make sure that every part of what I'm presenting or what I'm doing is right. Otherwise, then I'm not performing well. And so just a life full of anxiety. And so then even after I became a believer and started serving the Lord, there was one time that I was I was gathering things at the office that I was working at the time, and I was supposed to wait and listen for the heat and air guy to come fix a heating unit that went out. And so I had music going. I was just doing what I was supposed to be doing, gathering things for a trip, and I didn't hear the door at all. Like, I didn't hear the doorbell. I didn't hear him knocking. And so then I received a text message from the person who was corresponding with him. It's like, well, did he get there? And I go, did who get here? Because no one showed up. I didn't hear anything. And so then I took that on as, oh my gosh, I didn't perform. I didn't do what I was supposed to be doing. And so, but again, I'm going to make it look like everything's peachy keen. I stuffed it down. But then having the community around me of, okay, a few days later of, this is what you're presenting. So this is what we're seeing in you. So having that safe community of just believers saying, there's something going on. So this is what it's like to be on the other side of you. And I think there's something that you need to examine or look at or take it to Jesus. And so I ended up doing that. And like some of the things Dr. Lori will tell in the next few videos about reframing stuff. I just sat down and got quiet with the Lord, connected with him, and said, okay, Jesus, what do you want to talk to me about? And he gave me this picture of me trying to run up a down escalator. So I'm trying to achieve it. I'm trying to get up there as fast as I can because there's this prize at the top that I have to get to no matter what. And so I'm running and I make it 3/4 of the way and I get tired and I just go back down. And so it's just a picture of me continually trying to go up and up and up. And then I finally just stop. And then I felt the leading of just, okay, Jesus, where are you? What do you want to tell me in this? And just the sweetness of, I saw the picture of just below the escalator was an elevator that he was holding the door open for me the entire time, saying that I want to go with you to that prize. And it doesn't matter what it looks like. And if you don't make it, it's okay. You'll get redos or whatever. But knowing that he had the elevator held for me the entire time, and that it didn't matter that I took maybe the easy way or that I was trying, that he still loved me so much to be like, I'll wait for you, however long it takes. So,
That's really
and that really broke off the performance. I mean, it's still a constant of renewing the mind of, okay, I got to make sure that I don't get to that place. And then having that community around me to say, hey, there's a little something, and you need to go find Jesus, and being able to just go back to that place of, okay, am I trying to go up the escalator again?
Yep.
And then just sitting with him and hearing what he says and getting the identity that we so desire to get from everything else in the world, but I have to get it from him. And that was really key for me to fight the battle of performance-based anxiety. Was getting to know who I was in him and what he did for me. And that's all that matters. So if I don't perform the way that someone else wants me to perform, that's not my thing to carry. That I can't make someone happy. I can't make someone mad. I can't disappoint someone. That my actions can, but as long as I continue just to know who I am in him, then that's really what matters in life.
I have a question. When you said you had a community that knew something wasn't right, can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes that's the thing that just keeps going. And look what beautiful thing took place because you addressed that. And that would be like a behavior that wasn't your normal, right? Like there was something coming out. So can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you, maybe even in that moment?
In that moment, it was a really close friend sat me down and said, hey, I think there's something that you need to talk to the Lord about. You're not fully, I don't want to say performing, but there was definitely something that was holding me back from being fully present, fully alive.
Okay.
But then I've also, after that, put into place with certain people of real or not real. Okay, I'm feeling this right now. Is this real or not real? And then having that safe community to say, this is not real. This is not a valid feeling. And then being like, okay, then I know that once I ask that and I get the answer, then I'm done. So if it is a real thing, then I have the strategy of going back to Jesus, asking him about it, figuring out what my part is and what I need to modify. Then if it's not real, then I'm able to just drop that wrong thinking that's not lined up with the guidelines, the standards, and then just go right back into what I was doing.
That's a guideline you've put in and safeguards you've put in so that your behavior matches up with who God says you are. So that friend noticed that, okay, Tab's not really acting the way she normally is when she's fully alive, fully present, fully available. I know in my family that might be like, I'm a little short or snippy or bark commands at my kids. Then when I realize I'm doing that even, I'm like, okay, what's this really about? So I know I do that with myself sometimes too, is recognizing my own behaviors and what those behaviors are portraying versus, like you said, those guardrails. If it's not, what can we do? Yeah. Do you guys have any examples?
I just wanted to tell her that you just make it seem so easy. We know that it's hard work because the scripture tells us it's going to be hard work, but you've set those things in place and you've done the hard work and you continue to do the hard work, and I think that's where so many times we get discouraged because we think, okay, I've done A, B, and C, so I should be well.
Right.
And everything is just going to be rainbows and butterflies from now on.
Yeah. And there was definitely times that I was like, okay, I just had to give myself a break. Like, I'm human.
Right.
I'm fully human. I'm not going to be perfect until eternity. And so it's just, okay, I got to drop all my, and it also goes back to control and pride of, I got to drop it. I just can't. I can't try to perform and allow myself to control because I have to perform.
Yeah,
That's good.
go ahead.
Those guardrails are so important about, so for me, it was helpful to think the Galatians, that's the basic. If you're not having the fruits of the Spirit when you're squeezed or bumped into, there's a problem. There's something that's going on. And embarrassing to admit, but I honestly felt like that the fruits of the Spirit were gifts that God gives. And so I would ask for the fruits of the Spirit, and I would just say, I don't have them naturally like my husband does. So Lord, will you just give me some patience and some peace, like it's a recipe, a dash of this and a tablespoon of that.
Right.
And I would wait, and I'm like, he won't give it to me. And I didn't, for me, the correlation was realizing that I have control, and that Philippians 4:8, for me, was a huge thing. This is what you can think on. And when you're thinking on things that are not that, then your mind and you're not going to be connected with God and in a place where you can have the fruits of the Spirit, where that's going to come out of you, because you're thinking on things that aren't lovely and praiseworthy. And even if they're not your thoughts, even if you're thinking on someone else's thoughts, on their negative thoughts, or watching something or listening to something, it just input affects output. And so what we behold, we become. And that's just really was sort of a huge revelation for me.
Me too. And the Philippians 4:8 changed everything in my walk with the Lord. I remember I was in a toxic situation, a relationship, and the Lord just said, it's time to leave that relationship. But it just consumed my every thought, my waking up in the morning is the first thing I thought about. And finally, he was just like, you can't even think about it. You can think about this. And he gave me a scripture. And every time a thought came in that wasn't lined up with Philippians 4:8, I would have to repeat it out loud until my words would overcome my thought pattern. And then I was able to say it quietly in my head. So I was retraining my brain. I think that's a part of that hard work that we were talking about, is just taking the time to let the scriptures actually renew our mind, and then my behaviors change. So then it was like I thought about that every few hours, and then it was once a day, and then finally it was gone out of my mind as my brain learned to think on the Philippians 4:8. It was life-changing.
So often it's hard for us because there may be something that's unresolved in our life.
Yes.
And so you think, somebody says, well, you can think on Philippians 4:8. That's what you're allowed to think on. And you're like, yeah, that's great and all, but I've got to deal with this.
Yeah.
And so you have to really decide and choose. I'm going to lay it down. I'm going to surrender it to you. And sometimes you have to do it hourly.
Yes.
It keeps cropping back up. I'm going to surrender this to you today, and I'm going to focus on our connection. Because as soon as I pick it up, I lose my peace, and I'm not.
I was a waitress at the time, and just that overwhelming toxic relationship thoughts whirling in my mind. I would have to leave and go to the bathroom, look myself in the mirror, and repeat a scripture until my mind settled back down. Then I'd go back to work until, the next time. But it was such a choice. And at first, like I said, I actually had to do it out loud. Fighting the battle just with my thoughts wasn't enough, that I had to utilize some senses to help me overcome. But then it really helps. But you're right. Can't keep picking it back up.
And something that a good way to think more about what your thoughts are and all like that is, I've had to do this where if I'm worrying or if I'm swirling about something that I just can't, I have to write it down, fold it up on a sticky note, put it in a jar and say, I can't have that right now. And then doing an inventory at the end of the week of opening them up and seeing how many times am I worrying about money, or how many times am I worrying about what other people think of me, or how many times, and then that really gives a good inventory of, man, my thoughts are not set in the right place right now, but I can do the work to continually change what I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about, and being able to just modify my living.
Yeah.
People don't always recognize, which this is what I love about this part, is because people will start to believe the lie that they don't have any power over their thoughts. Like they'll just like, well, I'm not trying to think about this, or I can't help that I think about this, but I'm telling you, like, yes, you can. Like, it is a decision. But Jesus loves us too much to be controlling. Do you know, like, he lets us choose. So when we're talking about hard work, we hear Dr. Lori say, this is going to take a lot of hard work. And just to be really, really clear that the hard work is in the choosing Jesus, even when it's hard or uncomfortable, or getting that new thought. And then he does the cleanup.
It's true.
Like, that's it. Like, we're not working to clean ourselves up. We're working to choose him even when it's hard. And he's the one that does it.
Yes.
Just to make everything super clear.
Yeah.
Well, and then with also the connection of God pulling that in as well, is then just sitting and saying, okay, Jesus, this is what I'm dealing with today. What do you want to do with me? And then it's like, let's go do something else completely different. So let's go outside and go for a walk, or let's go lay in a hammock, or let's go to the store and do this chore that you needed to do. I mean, it's just, and then it's like, okay, then you don't think about it. I mean, you're so focused on doing this one thing, then it's like, okay, then it's a continual reshaping and remolding of the way that you think.
Yeah.
I love the hitch example that she gives, where she says, stay in your lane. This is what you can do. And so often when we find ourselves out of sorts, it's because we've stepped out of our lane and we're trying to do a different dance move, and then we're not supposed to be doing that. And I've said it over and over again, but I really did consider the Philippians 4:8 as like an alcoholic would, to say, I'm not healthy enough to engage on whatever
this conversation.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to step away from that. At some point, I may be able to engage that conversation with you, but right now, I'm trying to keep my peace. That's my number one goal, and I can't engage at all. I can't watch that news show. I can't watch that because I drop it. I've lost my peace again. And so while you're trying to train your brain to think on all things good and pure and lovely, and it's so easy to get back off track when you've been doing the other for so long. So putting the reminders on your mirror, on your car dashboard, making sure that your friends and family understand that this is what I'm trying to do, is think on the things that God said I'm allowed to think on, and just needing reinforcements to keep you on track.
I love that idea of like saying, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep my peace. I can't talk about that right now.
Yeah.
The bravery, that's fabulous.
Like, nope, can't do it. And normally I would jump right on in and solve it and try to solve it and ruminate on it and I would be in knots, and I would be just building and building and building till eventually I would blow, because I felt like it was mine to solve and so just realizing that. And also one more thing, thinking about it as kryptonite. What is your kryptonite and what is your superpower? And God made us all so unique and gifted, gave us each individual gifts. And he loves how he made us, and he knew everything that he did, how he put things in place. But if we can just sort of get in touch with that, and so we can realize and share it with others so that they can say, I know that's your strength and that's your weakness, so I'm going to help you to operate in your strengths, and not, when you start to fall into your weakness, lift you back up. It's the self-awareness that's so important, to be self-aware with God and then with a community that's going to help us too.
And to figure out who we are, recognize who he says we are, not who the world says we are. And those are very different, and so those scriptures that tell us the truth about who he says we are, and then to know whose we are, those will change everything and make those make us be able to believe that we can stay in our lane because we know that he says we can.
Yeah. And they talk about it like, he says, like, in bringing all of yourself to the table. Mm-hmm. And so I don't remember what book it was, but we read this book and it talks about bringing every part of you, the parts that you like and the parts that you don't like, to the table before Jesus. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, like, you can't crucify what you cover. You can't, if you won't acknowledge that it's there, you can't pin it to the cross. And so it talks about bringing all of those self-awareness things whenever you're sitting there and you're like, no, do I really do that? Like, I might do it a little bit, but do I really? Right. And then you want to make excuses for it. You're like, but it's just a little bit. So that behavior is probably okay. Or mine, I just laugh. I'm like, haha,
justification.
That's cute. Yeah. Like, but to him, he's like, actually, that's an issue. And not an issue as in condemning, but man, this isn't everything that you could be. This isn't my original design for you. And you'll actually love it more when I can introduce you to you and you're not having to present something that isn't who you are.
Yeah. And that's like having him help us refine our character.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Until we're more and more and more and more like him.
And that's the best thing we could do for the people around us. So the people that I'm thinking about your story, like, if people are calling and want to engage in conversations that aren't healthy or they're trying to keep you in that box, but really the best thing that we could do for the people around us is for us to walk fully in the original identity that God gave us. Like, that's actually the healthiest thing that we could do for our environments. And for the people who think that they don't want us to change, when in reality, you're like, you guys, like, the best thing that I could do for you is to not be what I've always been. That's like, let's have room to grow here.
Yeah, that's good. Well, do you feel like doing a recap?
Yeah, I do. So here's what I'm hearing. Is that if you're in this place where you're recognizing that some of the behaviors that you learned growing up or even now aren't in line with the hitch dance moves and you're out doing some kind of break dancing, other things that just don't go along with these guidelines, that maybe it's time to bring your whole self to the table, that maybe it's time to say, Jesus, here's where I am. Will you meet me here? Will you change me? I have these issues and it's going to be hard work to continue to choose him even when it's hard, but then he will come in and transform you from the inside out and it will affect everyone around you. But I would just encourage you now that you can't crucify what you cover. Will you stand just fully vulnerable before the Lord with all of your traits and all of the things that are inside of you that aren't necessarily pretty and look at them with him. So until next time.
Okay, so connection with self. That's an interesting one for me because one thing that I've always been told is that I have a strong presence when I walk into the room. And the way my sister once put it is that I'm so much fun and I can bring a lot of laughter and joy into the room, but it's like I have my hand on the fun plug. And if it's not good and I'm not happy, I can rip the fun plug out, and no matter what your best efforts or try is, it's not going to be fun. I'm not going to have fun, you're not going to have fun, it's over. So realizing that about myself, that really I have an opportunity to either carry in fun and joy and peace and the fruits of the Spirit and his presence into a room, or I can really shift the atmosphere and make things miserable for everybody around me, which was really my mode of operation up until this point. Like I said earlier, I was a huge overachiever, very task-oriented and driven, and so therefore I often solved problems, got things done, and when I couldn't solve a problem and where things were out of order, that was when she said, bumped into you. When you're bumped into, what comes out? That's what Lori said. When I was bumped into, what came out was very different from the fruit of the Spirit. So this was a huge revelation for me. And for me, being somebody who, again, is sort of like a dog with a bone. If it's a
presidential candidate that I'm going to be running for, I want to convince everybody to run for that candidate. Whatever I've set my mind to, I'm going to go get it and convince you to do that. So that being the case, when I found Jesus, I'm a dog with a bone for Jesus. And I had to realize that there was a strong correlation between the Philippians 4:8, what are you thinking on? Are you thinking on things that are good and lovely and pure and praiseworthy, or are you not? And even when they weren't my thoughts, even if someone else was telling me negative things, it really was impacting how I was then in turn going to act. If I was watching a movie that was depressing, if I was watching a movie that was disturbing or dark, all of that really did affect me. And so I had to start really putting practical things in my life. Honestly, I had to turn off the news. I had to figure out a different way to get my source of current events, because I would feel when I came home from Oklahoma, I would feel myself losing my peace when the news was on. I could feel the tension rising in my shoulders and in my neck. And I can't have that on. Instead, I've got to listen to things that are good and that are lovely and that are praiseworthy. And at some point, it's going to come down to faith, and I'm going to have to lay the direction of the world arguments at Jesus' feet, because I can't control it. And this was a huge sort of struggle for me, because things do happen in life that are that need solutions and that you need to contemplate. And negative things do happen, but how much of your attention are you willing to give it? And are you willing to put it down after an appropriate amount of time and then turn back to Jesus and refocus on Him and let Him deal with all of this? It is not mine to carry, it is His to carry, and that was a huge revelation for me. So anytime that I would sense myself feeling stress rising or irritable, or I would literally have to choose, I'm not going to think on this thing right now. I'm going to give it to God. I'm going to choose to put it aside, and I'll address it later, because my number one goal is to learn how to carry His peace. And if that's going to cause me to drop my peace, I cannot do it. I cannot think on it. If people would call me to gossip or to complain, I would say, literally, like an alcoholic, I'm not well enough to hear this negativity. And it was a choice. And as I've started to walk on this journey and remembering, I had Philippians 4:8 and Galatians 5:22 up on my mirror, and I literally somebody would call and say, what's going on? You don't sound like things are going well. I would say, I know what happened. I started thinking on things I'm not allowed to think about. Lori says, you're allowed to think on Philippians 4:8. And I love how she said, mic drop. That's it. And if you're thinking on the other things, then quite frankly, it's sin. Those things we have to give to God. And that was a real turning point for me. And so on this journey, that's just been one of those aha moments that if I want to carry His presence and His peace, I've got to think about what I'm thinking about, that the input affects the output. And the more I focus on His face and His glory, the more the fruits of the Spirit will just bubble out. And so that is a good lesson for me.
So prior to this class and kind of up until this class, I had a super hard time with adrenaline seeking behaviors. And that could mean just being super reckless with myself, and then even blaming other people for that recklessness, or blaming the circumstance, or blaming, well, that wasn't fun. And so whenever I got here, I really got the opportunity to figure out what it means to let Jesus introduce me to me and to bring every part of myself to the table. And it was super hard for just a little bit, but knowing like, man, of course this is the way that I responded, or of course I was reckless in this way growing up because of what I learned and what was happening in my brain as a kid. And then I just hadn't had to ever live differently before. So basically, what happens in connecting with myself is I got to sit down and just kind of imagine myself at a table, and then all the parts that I want to hide
or all the parts that I don't want to bring up, or all the parts that I think that if only he knew that he can't heal this, or he won't work like this, or man, I don't want to acknowledge that I do that. I don't want to acknowledge that I have adrenaline-seeking behaviors, and I don't want to acknowledge that I'm reckless. But what does it look like to actually sit down and bring those things up and then let him do what only he can do, which is heal it and meet us in love? But you can't crucify what you cover. And that's something that I learned pretty quickly, that the more that I wanted to just shove it away and say, no, I don't have adrenaline-seeking behaviors, no, I'm not reckless, the more that it got worse. And then actually it becomes idolatry, because then basically what I'm saying is this safety behavior of recklessness, I love more than Jesus. Every time that I chose that, rather than letting him heal it. So eventually we got to this place, and I was like, all right, and I'm weeping, and I think it's going to be horrible that he's mad at me. And I'm like, here's what I have: adrenaline-seeking behaviors, and I'm reckless. But you know what? That's not what he said. He pulled me in, and he said, I'm going to teach you how to be safe, because I'm going to be your safety. And you might have not grown up having a lot of safety, or people who were really looking out for your well-being. But I'm going to do that because I always have been. So he was going to teach me how he was my safety, how he's always been there. And he took me into this vision, and I'm a little girl, and he's got roller skates hanging off of his shoulder, and we're walking hand in hand. I'm probably like 3 or 4. And we walk up, and we're at my happy place, which is my grandma's house. And there's this big hill. I mean, it looked a lot bigger when I was 3 or 4. But there's this big hill, and we're going to roller skate down it. And I'm so excited to go. And we get to the top of the hill, and we sit down. And then Jesus starts putting on my wrist pads and my knee pads and my elbow pads and my helmet. And I was in this vision, and I'm 3 or 4, and I just remember he buckled my helmet, and then I just said, Jesus, do it again. We never even made it down the hill. I just wanted to and needed to experience what it was like to have him putting my helmet. We just took it on and we took it off, just over and over and over again for probably a solid 6 months to a year. And this is how he ministered to me with adrenaline-seeking behaviors. But I wouldn't even know that that's what was needed, that whenever I was behaving unsafe, it's because I felt unsafe and I had really big emotions. And whenever the feelings got too big, in order to stabilize myself or to make myself feel safe again, then I would go do something to feel a lot really, really quickly, rather than relying on him to be my safety net, and rather than relying on him to be the one who's going to protect me and who has always protected me. And in that one moment of bringing that to the table, of saying, okay, Jesus, here's what I struggle with. Here it is. And then what he wanted to do was heal it from 3 or 4. Not from the middle of trauma, but from the middle that I first started feeling unsafe. And then I could see throughout my life all the places that he'd been protecting me. And this is what he does. This is how he introduces us to ourselves. Is whenever we finally just say, okay, here it is. Here's what I do. Here's the behavior that I want gone. Then he takes it and he heals it. And he restores the things that were lost in the middle of it. And then he says, when you didn't feel like I was connected, guess what? I was. And it's super, super fun.